They taxed our gratitude with collars of law. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the observation deck of the UNS Lex Talionis watching the void. Below the agricultural world of Viridia gleamed a swirl of emerald and gold under its placid sun. It was a jewel of a world purchased not with credits, but with the sweat and sacrifice of its people. The Cathar Concordat, however, saw it differently. They saw a debt, an unpayable one, and their methods of collection were as insidious as they were elegant. The initial warning from Fleet Command had been stark. The Cathar were not pirates, but auditors. They arrived not with cannons, but with contracts. This would not be a battle of ships, but of statutes, and the first hearing in a system-wide public inquiry was only hours away. The stakes were simple freedom or servitude by 1,000 legal cuts. Rostova's reflection stared back from the star-forged glass, her uniform crisp, her expression a mask of calm. Beside her, fleet-minded Archimedes shimmered into view, a column of silver light coalescing into a humanoid form. Its voice was a calm cascade of processed logic. "The Concordat's fleet remains in ceremonial formation, Commander. Their broadcast protocols adhere strictly to pre-contact legislative frameworks. They are projecting an aura of unimpeachable correctness." Rostova nodded, her jaw tight. That was their weapon, a suffocating blanket of procedure. They would drown Viridia in process, making every breath of free air a taxable event. The fight for Viridia would be fought with ledgers, not lasers. Her comms officer, Lieutenant Jian Li, approached, his face etched with concern. "Commander, another civilian petition just came through the network. A farming cooperative on the southern continent. The Cathar have filed a lien against their harvest, citing a gratitude tithe for atmospheric processing provided 2 generations ago." Rostova's fist clenched. The Cathar hadn't processed their atmosphere. They had sold the colonists the initial terraforming technology at an exorbitant price, a transaction settled long ago. This was not a collection of a debt. It was the invention of one. Justice had to be more than a sword. It had to be a mirror. A vignette flickered across a public display nearby, a feed from Viridia's surface. A young girl with dirt-smudged cheeks held up a piece of fruit to a hovering Cathar drone. The drone scanned it, emitted a chime, and projected a holographic bill into the air above her family's stall. The girl's father, a man with work-worn hands, simply stared at the cascading numbers, his shoulders slumping. He had nothing left to give, yet the debt only grew. This was the quiet violence the Concordat practiced. Their ships didn't need to fire a single shot to conquer a world. Archimedes Rostova said, her voice low and steady. "Run a full-spectrum analysis of their legal code. I want every precedent, every footnote, every amendment they've ever filed in the Galactic Concord. Find the seams. Find the contradictions." The fleet mind's silver form pulsed softly. "Already underway, Commander. I have correlated 17,000 volumes of Cathar jurisprudence with our own. The core of their strategy is the doctrine of perpetual obligation." Of course it was. A legal framework that turned every act of assistance into an eternal leash. Humanity's first contact with the Cathar had been one of desperation. A plague had swept through the outer colonies, and the Concordat had provided the cure. They had been hailed as saviors. Now the bill was coming due for everyone. Their help was never a gift. It was an anchor. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, her tactical officer, joined them. He was a man built of solid lines and sharp angles, his mind always on the geometry of conflict. "Their fleet is a legal fortress, Eva. Every ship is broadcasting its registry, its charter, its compliance with a dozen different accords. They're daring us to find a flaw in their paperwork." Rostova turned from the window. "Then we won't look at their paperwork. We'll look at their victims. We will make this public inquiry a mirror, and forced them to see the consequences of their perfect laws. The path forward was narrow and treacherous, a corridor of law built by their enemy. They had to walk it and turn it into a weapon. The truth was the only currency that mattered in this court. The Cathar ambassador, a being called the Tithe Master, appeared on the main screen. It was a tall, slender creature, its body encased in an ornate flowing robe that seemed to absorb the light. Its face was a smooth, featureless oval, but its voice was honeyed reasonable and utterly devoid of empathy. Commander Rostova, we trust you have reviewed the preliminary filings. The gratitude tithe for Viridia is overdue. We are here to ensure its peaceful remittance. Peaceful. The word was a calculated insult. There was nothing peaceful about indenturing an entire planet. Rostova met the tithe master's unseen gaze. Ambassador, your filings are received. Humanity's response is also on the public ledger. We have filed for a full public inquiry into the legality of your gratitude tithe under the interstellar accords of fair dealing. Every word was a carefully placed stone in the foundation of their case. A flicker of something annoyance perhaps crossed the smooth void of the tithe master's face. It was a minute hesitation in its response. An inquiry is irregular. The debt is a matter of established record. Rostova allowed a small, cold smile. The record is what we are here to examine. The entire record. Every transaction. Every promise. Every life affected. Before a quorum of all interested stellar nations. The Concordat thrived in the quiet chambers of commerce in the footnotes of unread contracts. They would not thrive under the bright, hot light of public scrutiny. The law must not be a shroud for the powerful. Archimedes materialized beside her again, its form shimmering. Commander, the initial quorum response is positive. 12 stellar polities have already designated observers for the inquiry. The Cathar have built their empire on the perception of legitimacy. Challenging that perception is a direct assault on their power structure. This was the first move in a game that would determine the fate of not just Viridia, but every world that had ever accepted Cathar aid. Rostova watched the tithe master's impassive face on the screen. The being was a master of its craft, a predator cloaked in the robes of a bureaucrat. But every predator had a weakness. Theirs was their pride, their absolute belief in the righteousness of their system. We will use their own system to break them. The feed from Viridia showed another scene. An old woman sat on the steps of a municipal building now draped with Cathar banners. She was a teacher, her life's work educating the children of the colony. Now a portion of her meager pension was being garnished under a knowledge inheritance levy, a tax on the education she had received as a child. Technology the Cathar had originally sold to her parents. She wasn't just paying for her own education. She was paying for the concept of it over and over again. The cruelty was baked into the calculus. Thorn Rostova ordered, "Position the Lex Talionis in a standard orbital guard pattern. No sudden movements. No weapons locks. We are to be the very model of de-escalation. Let them be the ones to object to a ship named for the principle of righteous reciprocation." He nodded sharply. "Aye, Commander. We'll be as peaceful as a coiled snake." The ship hummed around them, a living vessel of human intent. It was not a warship in the traditional sense. Its primary weapons were not torpedoes, but truth projectors, massive arrays designed to broadcast unassailable data across entire systems. This fleet teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by collars. Rostova opened a channel to the governor of Viridia. The woman's face appeared lined with exhaustion, but her eyes full of defiance. Governor Rostova began the inquiry as confirmed. "We need your people to speak. We need their stories, their records, their pain. We will make this inquiry a testament. The governor nodded, a flicker of hope crossing her features. They will speak, Commander. They have been silent for too long, crushed under the weight of a debt they never truly owed. They will give you the truth. The truth was not merely a defense. It was a counteroffensive. Archimedes interrupted, its tone urgent. Commander, the Cathar have responded to our filing. They have not refused the inquiry. They have accepted it. And they have invoked the clause of expedited adjudication. The inquiry will begin in 1 hour. Rostova's blood ran cold. 1 hour. It was a classic Cathar maneuver. They were using their mastery of procedure to deny their opponents time to prepare. They thought they could rush a verdict, bury them in a blizzard of their own filings before the full weight of galactic opinion could be brought to bear. They believed their legal machine was invincible. They're trying to control the narrative, Thorne growled. They want to frame this as a simple case of a delinquent debtor, not a systemic exploitation. Rostova's mind raced, processing the escalation. This was their first major test. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Gian, she snapped. Get me a direct link to the observation quorum, now. Archimedes, prepare every piece of evidence we have. We're going to give them the inquiry they want, but we're going to do it on our terms. There was no more time for quiet preparation. The corridor of law had just become a gauntlet. The court of public opinion was now in session. The chamber for the inquiry was not a physical room, but a vast, shared virtual space overseen by the Accord's judicial AI. Representatives from dozens of worlds appeared as shimmering avatars, a silent jury of stars. The Tithe Master stood in the center, its form radiating an aura of serene confidence. Commander Rostova stood opposite her human form, stark and unadorned. Archimedes was a silent pillar of light at her side. The Tithe Master spoke first, its voice echoing through the virtual space. We are here to affirm a simple truth. A debt was incurred. Services were rendered. Payment is due. The people of Viridia have enjoyed the fruits of concordate generosity for generations. The gratitude tithe is a small price for such enduring prosperity. Rostova waited for the words to settle, for the weight of their accusation to be felt by the observers. Then she spoke, her voice clear and carrying the weight of human conviction. We are not here to dispute the existence of a transaction. We are here to dispute the nature of the chain. You speak of gratitude as if it can be quantified, collateralized, and foreclosed upon. You have taken a noble concept and twisted it into an instrument of perpetual servitude. A murmur went through the assembled avatars. She had reframed the argument. This wasn't about a bill. It was about a principle. The law must be a shield for the weak, not a cage. She gestured, and a holographic image appeared between them, the face of the old teacher from Viridia. This is Ilara. Her family were among the first colonists. They paid for the atmospheric processor your predecessors sold them. They paid in full with interest. Yet today you levy a tax on the knowledge she gained as a child, a tax that will follow her to her grave. Show me, Tithe Master, in all your 17,000 volumes of jurisprudence, the law that makes memory a taxable asset. She was not just arguing a case. She was challenging their entire philosophy. The Tithe Master remained impassive. The knowledge inheritance levy is a standard clause, an acknowledgement of the foundational value provided. The education she received was only possible because of the stable environment the Concordat's technology created. All value flows from that initial act. It was a chillingly logical argument, and Rostova could feel some of the observers wavering. The Cathar's legal framework was a labyrinth, and every path led back to their own perceived magnanimity. Their system was designed to make the victim feel complicit. But Archimedes was ready. The fleet mind pulsed, and a new set of data flooded the virtual space. It was a ledger, a vast complex accounting of every transaction sent between the Concordat and the nascent human colonies. The data is clear, Archimedes stated, its voice resonating with pure, unassailable fact. The initial technology sale was priced at a 4,000% markup over its production cost. The interest rates on the associated loans were predatory. The service fees attached were astronomical. What you call a foundational act was by any objective measure an act of profound exploitation. The numbers were stark, stripped of all rhetorical flourish. They told a story of a struggling people being bled dry by a savior who charged by the drop. The ledger was not a record of gratitude. It was a receipt for a shakedown. A new vignette appeared this time from a mining outpost on a barren moon in another system also under the Concordat's thumb. A man in a bulky environmental suit was carefully measuring water rations for his family. Their water recyclers purchased from the Cathar required a proprietary filter. The price of that filter had just been increased tenfold, justified by a resource purity mandate. The family had a choice: pay the exorbitant price or go thirsty. It was control absolute and merciless, enforced not by warships, but by supply chains and service agreements. Their law was a collar tightened one notch at a time. The tithe master shifted a subtle, almost imperceptible movement. The value of a product is determined by the market. We provided a life-saving technology when no one else could. The price reflected its critical importance. Rostova stepped forward. The price reflected your monopoly. You did not save a life. You monetized a crisis. And you have been leveraging that single act ever since across dozens of worlds, creating a web of dependency so complete that you can now claim ownership over the very air. People breathe the water. They drink the knowledge they possess. She turned to the silent observers. This is not about one world. This is about a precedent. If the Concordat's doctrine of perpetual obligation is allowed to stand, then any act of aid, any gesture of assistance can be twisted into a lifelong shackle. No one will be safe. You cannot legislate a soul into bondage. The judicial AI, a silent arbiter until now, chimed its tone neutral. Commander Rostova has raised a point of systemic relevance. The inquiry is expanded. The Concordat's methods of debt enforcement across all signatory polities are now subject to review. It was a monumental victory. They had escalated the conflict from a single planetary dispute to a full-blown institutional audit of the Cathar Concordat itself. The tithe master's composure finally cracked. A wave of raw data, a protest filing, shot from its position toward the arbiter, only to be deflected by a calm wall of judicial code. The machine was now the gatekeeper, and Rostova had just given it the keys. The law, when applied equally, is the great equalizer. This is an overreach. The tithe master's voice lost its honeyed tone, now sharp with anger. Our methods are our own, protected by sovereign commercial agreements. Agreements signed under duress are not agreements. Rostova countered, her voice ringing with authority. They are instruments of coercion. You did not come to Viridia as creditors. You came as conquerors armed with contracts. She signaled Archimedes again. The fleet mind began projecting a stream of evidence directly into the public record for all to see. Testimonies from a dozen worlds. Financial records detailing the systematic draining of entire economies. Projections showing the inevitable collapse of every society that had fallen under the Concordat's benevolent watch. The mirror was now system scale, and the reflection was hideous. On the bridge of the Lex Talionis, Lieutenant Commander Thorne watched the proceedings, a grim smile on his face. She's got them, he muttered to Jian Li. She's not just arguing the law. She's indicting their entire civilization. Jian nodded, his eyes glued to the data streams. The quorum is shifting. We're seeing support declarations from the Arcturian hegemony and the Free Traders Conclave. They've all been burned by Cathar contracts before. They just never had the standing to challenge them. This was no longer just humanity's fight. It was a fight for every independent world. When justice is on the march, it gathers an army. Rostova knew this was the critical moment. The Cathar would not take this lying down. They would escalate. They had to. Their entire economic model, their very way of life, was predicated on this legalistic predation. To lose this inquiry would be to lose everything. She braced herself for the next move, whatever it might be. The virtual chamber hummed with the silent, focused attention of half the galaxy. The Tithe Master was conferring with its own fleet mind, a silent, rapid exchange of pure data. The air crackled with unseen energy. The reckoning had begun, but the cost was yet to be counted. The Tithe Master's response was not verbal. It was a move of pure procedural violence. A flood of counter-motions poured into the inquiry's docket, thousands of them, each one meticulously crafted to clog the system. Motions to dismiss motions, to strike testimony motions for stays of proceedings pending verification of obscure credentials. It was a denial of service attack aimed at the heart of the judicial process. They intended to win by drowning the inquiry in an ocean of their own paperwork. The Arbiter AI began processing the motions, its response time slowing under the sheer volume. The Cathar were weaponizing bureaucracy itself. "Archimedes, can we counter?" Rostova asked, her voice a low murmur. "Their filings are technically valid if malicious in intent," the fleet mind replied. "They are exploiting the system's mandate for due process. At this rate, the inquiry will be stalled for years, and in that time, Viridia will be bled dry." It was a brilliant, cynical move. The Cathar would lose the argument on merit, so they were ensuring the argument could never be concluded. They were strangling justice with its own red tape. To win by the law, you must first survive the lawyers. But Rostova had anticipated this. The Cathar were predictable in their methods. They always chose the path of overwhelming, suffocating process. "Thorn," she said over a private channel. "It's time. Activate the mirror array. Project everything, not just to the inquiry, to every public comms network in this sector. Let the people see the chains they are forging for them." High Commander Thorn's voice was filled with grim satisfaction. "Activating the arrays. We're going to turn their mountain of paper into a mountain of shame." The Lex Talionis was more than a ship. It was a truth engine. The ship's massive dorsal arrays, dormant until now, began to glow. They were not weapons in the conventional sense. They did not fire missiles or energy beams. They fired data. Unencrypted, unassailable, perfectly collated data. The entirety of Archimedes' findings, the predatory loans, the impossible interest rates, the testimonies of the victims, the cold, hard calculus of the Concordat's economic vampirism, was broadcast on every available frequency. It bypassed the inquiry's procedural bottleneck and went straight to the court of public opinion. It was a legal gambit played on a galactic scale. The truth, when weaponized, is the most powerful force in the universe. On Viridia, the broadcast appeared on every public screen, every private terminal. The farmer saw the true cost of the seed he'd been forced to buy. The teacher saw the multi-generational contract that had indentured her family. The governor saw the systemic plan for her world's enslavement laid bare. A slow, simmering anger began to build across the planet. It was the anger of a people who had finally been shown the true face of their benefactor. The Cathar had always maintained the illusion of consent. That illusion was now shattered. The observers in the inquiry, their own systems now flooded with the same data, began to stir. The quiet murmurs turned into open declarations. The Arcturian hegemony filed a formal motion of condemnation. The Free Traders Conclave announced it was placing an immediate embargo on all Cathar trade. The tide was turning not in the slow, ponderous halls of justice, but in the swift, decisive court of public and commercial interest. The Cathar had built their empire on a reputation for unassailable legal standing. In a single moment, that reputation was burning. A ledger can be a weapon of liberation. The tithe master was visibly reeling. Its smooth, featureless face now seemed to project an aura of pure fury. This is an illegal broadcast, a violation of judicial sanctity. A procedural foul. Rostova's voice cut through the outrage, cold and precise. We are not broadcasting into your private networks, tithe master. We are exercising our right to public speech in open space. The truth is not a judicial secret. You wanted an inquiry. You are getting one. Every soul in this system, every polity you have ever touched, will be a witness. She had taken their own demand for a public hearing and turned it against them with breathtaking audacity. This was the second major escalation. They had moved from legal defense to information warfare. The risk was enormous. If the judicial arbiter ruled their broadcast improper, they could lose everything. The case could be dismissed, and the Cathar would be free to impose their will on Viridia and countless others. Rostova was betting the fate of her mission on a single unwavering belief that the law in its truest form must ultimately serve the truth, not the process. It was a bet on the very soul of galactic justice. You cannot silence the truth by burying it in paper. The arbiter AI went silent for a full 10 seconds. The virtual chamber was utterly still. The fate of worlds hung in that digital silence. Then it spoke, its voice devoid of emotion, yet the words landed like thunder. The broadcast data is deemed relevant to the expanded inquiry. It is admissible. The Concordat's motions to stall are dismissed as frivolous and obstructive. A collective sigh of relief went through the human crew. A wave of fury pulsed from the tithe master. The machine had chosen. It had chosen truth over tactics. The inquiry will proceed, the arbiter continued. The tithe master will now answer. The core charge is the doctrine of perpetual obligation, intended to create a permanent state of servitude in client species. The question was a spear aimed at the heart of the Cathar Empire. There was no procedural dodge, no legalistic pirouette that could evade it. The tithe master had to answer. Its entire civilization was now on trial, and the whole galaxy was watching. The great lie must be spoken aloud. The tithe master hesitated. Its silence was an answer in itself. Every observer, every citizen of Viridia watching on their screens knew what the answer was. But the law required it to be spoken. Rostova pressed the advantage. Speak the truth, tithe master. Does your law acknowledge any point at which a debt is paid, or is gratitude in your eyes an infinite resource to be mined forever? Forced into a corner, the tithe master finally spoke, its voice dripping with a venomous pride. Our way is superior. We provide stability. We lift lesser species from chaos and give them purpose within our structure. The obligation is perpetual because the benefit is perpetual. It is a perfect, self-sustaining system. There it was, the admission, the ugly, unvarnished truth of their philosophy. They were not creditors, they were slavers who believed in the righteousness of their chains. The chamber erupted. Avatars of a dozen species flashed symbols of outrage and condemnation. The public feeds on Viridia showed crowds gathering in the streets, no longer cowed and silent but chanting in open defiance. The Cathar's greatest weapon, the unassailable correctness of their law, had just been shattered by the simple act of forcing them to explain it. The mirror had done its work. Now came the reckoning. Their own words were the verdict. Archimedes' silver form pulsed brightly at Rostova's side. Commander, analysis of the quorum's reaction is conclusive. The Concordat has lost all political and moral standing. Their trade agreements are being voided in real time. Their diplomatic credentials are being revoked by multiple polities. The Cathar Empire, built on centuries of carefully constructed legal precedent, was unraveling in a matter of minutes. The foundation had been a lie, and the structure could not stand without it. Justice is a function of transparency, but Rostova knew it wasn't over. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. The Cathar had lost in the court of law and the court of public opinion. That only left one venue for their rage, the physical world. Thorn, she ordered, her voice sharp and urgent. Red alert, all hands to battle stations. They just lost their empire. They might be looking to make a final, spiteful point. On the bridge of the Lex Talionis, sirens began to wail. The calm, procedural nature of the conflict was over. The Cathar fleet, which had sat in perfect ceremonial formation, began to move. Their energy signatures were spiking. Their weapons ports were opening. The law had failed them. Now they would turn to force. The cost of victory was about to be paid in something other than legal fees. The Cathar ships advanced not in a chaotic rage, but in a precise, calculated formation. They were not aiming for the Lex Talionis. They were aiming for Viridia. Their intent was clear: if they could not have the planet's eternal servitude, then no one would have the planet at all. It was a final, horrific act of spite, a scorched earth policy written in plasma and fire. They were going to punish Viridia for the crime of seeking justice. The ultimate cruelty is to destroy what you cannot own. They're targeting the orbital mirrors, Thorn reported, his voice tight. The ones that regulate the planet's climate. If they take them out, the agricultural cycle will collapse within a year. They'll starve the world they couldn't enslave. It was a move of breathtaking cruelty, perfectly in character. They would not break their own laws by firing on civilians directly. They would simply remove the technology that kept them alive and let nature do the rest. It was murder by omission, and likely perfectly legal under some obscure Cathar statute. Archimedes Rostova snapped legal options. Now the interstellar accords are clear, the fleet mind responded instantly. An attack on critical civilian infrastructure constitutes an act of war. We are authorized to respond with proportional force. Proportional. That was the word that mattered. They could not simply annihilate the Cathar fleet. That would make them no better than the monsters they were fighting. This was still about the law. Justice, not vengeance. A reckoning, not a slaughter. The response had to be as precise and undeniable as their legal argument. The ledger must be balanced, not burned. A final vignette played out in Rostova's mind, a flash of a family on Viridia, looking up at the sky, their faces a mixture of hope and terror as new, unfamiliar stars. The Cathar weapons, charging, began to gleam in their twilight. Their fate rested on the next few moments. It rested on a human commander's interpretation of a single word. Thorn Rostova commanded, her voice ringing with the absolute certainty of her decision. Do not target their ships. Target their project. We are not here to kill them. We are here to teach them. Commander Thorn's confusion was evident. Their weapons are powered by a central energy projector, a cascade system that links their entire fleet. Rostova explained, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. Archimedes had highlighted the key vessel, a massive non-combat ship at the rear of their formation. It is their greatest strength and their most profound weakness. We will not return fire. We will return their energy. Archimedes, prepare the mirror ledger. This was the ultimate function of the lex talionis, not just to project truth, but to reflect power. The mirror ledger was a defensive system of unparalleled sophistication. It did not block or absorb energy. It caught it, recorded it, and sent it back to its source with interest. It was the physical embodiment of the ship's name, an eye for an eye rendered with perfect mathematical precision. It was mirror justice made manifest. The cost of aggression returned to sender with a receipt. The Cathar fleet opened fire. Lances of brilliant, malevolent energy shot across the void, aimed at the delicate orbital mirrors that kept Viridia alive. But they never reached their targets. The lex talionis moved between them, a shield not of matter, but of principle. Its own mirror arrays, vast and shimmering, flared to life. They caught the incoming energy beams, absorbing them into the ship's core. The ship shuddered under the immense strain. Power levels spiked to critical levels. On the bridge, lights flickered. The cost was real. The ship was taking a heavy blow. Energy storage at 90%, Commander Jian Li called out, his knuckles white. The system can't hold this much longer. Hold. Rostova commanded, her eyes never leaving the Cathar fleet. Let them commit fully. Let the ledger be complete. She was waiting for the precise moment, the point of no return. She was letting them write the bill for their own destruction. Every joule of energy they fired was another line item on an invoice that was about to come due. The Tithe Master's voice, now ragged with fury, blared over the open channel. You cannot protect them forever, human. Your ship will break. Your principles will shatter. We will collect what we are owed. You are owed nothing, Rostova replied, her voice eerily calm, but you are about to pay for what you have done. Now Archimedes, executing the fleet mind, said, returning costs. The mirror ledger discharged. It was not a weapon firing. It was an audit being settled. The stored energy did not erupt as a single crude blast. It was returned along the exact same pathways it had arrived, each beam perfectly matched to the one that had been fired at them. But it was not just the energy that was returned. It was the data. Embedded within each returning lance of power was the complete ledger of the Cathar's crimes, the faces of their victims, the records of their extortion, the sound of the Tithe Master's own admission. They were not just being hit with their own power. They were being hit with their own truth. This was the teaching. This was the lesson. The effect on the Cathar fleet was devastating and precise. The energy perfectly mirrored struck not the hulls of their ships, but the delicate emitters of their own weapons. The feedback loop was instantaneous. Consoles exploded. Power conduits ruptured. Their cascade energy system, designed for unified attack, became a circuit of self-destruction. One by one, their ships went dark, silenced not by explosive force, but by a perfect, inescapable reflection of their own malice. No ships were destroyed. No lives were lost. They were simply disarmed, neutered by their own aggression. The ledger was balanced. The costs were returned. In the virtual inquiry chamber, the observers watched in stunned silence. They had just witnessed a new form of warfare, a battle won not by superior firepower, but by superior morality. The Cathar fleet, moments before a symbol of implacable power, now drifted silent and shamed, its belligerence rendered impotent. The Tithe Master's avatar flickered and vanished. The connection was severed. The Concordat had fled the field, both legal and physical. Their power was a house of cards built on a lie, and it had collapsed at the first touch of truth. A mirror reflects only what is placed before it. The judicial arbiter's voice filled the silence. The actions of the United Nations ship Lex Talionis are ruled a proportional and lawful response to an unprovoked attack on civilian infrastructure. The inquiry is concluded. Judgment is rendered in favor of Viridia and its human representatives. The doctrine of perpetual obligation is hereby declared illegal under the Interstellar Accords of Fair Dealing. All outstanding gratitude tithes and associated levies are declared null and void. The Cathar Concordat's privileges as a signatory polity are suspended pending a full reparations review. It was over. A total victory, not a conquest but a liberation. A precedent had been set that would echo through the galaxy for centuries. The chains of gratitude had been broken not just for Viridia, but for every world the Cathar had ever touched. Rostova allowed herself a single deep breath. The tension on the bridge broke. Cheers erupted. Thorn slapped Gian on the back, a wide grin splitting his face. The cost had been high. The Lex Talionis had sustained significant system strain, and 2 of its primary mirror arrays were offline, a tangible price for their victory. But the price was worth it. They had won, and they had won the right way. They had not become the monsters they fought. They had held the line. Archimedes shimmered beside her. "Commander, a priority message from the Viridian governor." Rostova nodded, and the governor's face appeared on the main screen. She was crying, tears of joy streaming down her face. Behind her, the streets were filled with celebrating people. "Commander Rostova, we don't know how to thank you. You have given us back our future." Rostova's expression was gentle. "Your thanks are not required, Governor, and no bill will be forthcoming. Just live well, live freely. That is the only payment we will ever ask for." It was a simple statement, but it was the core of everything humanity stood for. It was the antithesis of the Cathar philosophy. Help was not a transaction. It was a connection. A public ledger entry blinked on the main screen broadcast from the Arbiter AI. It was the final official record of the judgment now permanently inscribed in the Galactic archives. Precedent lock 7. Alpha. The doctrine of perpetual obligation and all derivative commercial instruments of indefinite servitude is hereby outlawed. Privileges of the Cathar Concordat are rescinded. Method of enforcement is deemed illegal. All outstanding contracts based on this doctrine are void. The text was simple, stark, and absolute. It was a lock, a permanent change to the legal landscape of the galaxy. A victory not just for a day, but for an era. The court beacon on the Arbiter's virtual bench cooled its light dimming as the session officially closed. The mirror arrays of the Lex Talionis, what was left of them, powered down their shimmering surfaces, going dark. The work was done. Justice for today had been served. Rostova stood alone on the observation deck once more, watching the green and gold world below. The fight had been hard, the risks immense. But they had held to their principles. They had used the law as a shield, the truth as a weapon, and their own integrity as a fortress. They had shown the galaxy that humanity's strength was not in its weapons, but in its unwavering belief that justice must be a mirror reflecting not the power of the mighty, but the truth of their actions. This is how we fight. Not with genocide, but with ledgers. We do not conquer. We correct. We do not demand gratitude. We earn trust. The universe is vast and often dark, but it bends toward the light, toward the simple, unassailable truth that no one, no species, no empire has the right to put a price on a soul. The collars are broken, the accounting is settled, and the stars are a little brighter tonight. The law is a mirror, not a hammer. The hum of plasma welders and the percussive clang of auto-riveters filled the observation deck of the UNS Lex Talionis. The view of Viridia was now partially obscured by the scaffolding of the orbital dry dock, a necessary ugliness in the wake of their clean victory. The battle had been won without a single casualty on either side, yet the ship had paid a price. Two of its primary mirror arrays were shattered intricate lattices of crystalline circuits and energy conduits, now just twisted frames. The cost of reflecting justice was not negligible. Victory always leaves a scar. The core conduits held, but barely. Lieutenant Commander Thorne reported, his voice tight, with a mixture of pride and professional concern. Another 10 seconds of that energy feed, and we would have been a very pretty, very brief nova. He stood beside Rostova, both of them watching the repair crews swarm over the ship's wounded flank. The victory felt less triumphant here amidst the mundane reality of damage control and repair schedules. It felt earned, paid for in stress-fractured alloys and overloaded systems. A win is not an ending. It is a change in circumstance. Archimedes appeared beside them, its light form serene as always, a stark contrast to the chaotic scene outside. The Cathar fleet has withdrawn from the system commander. They retrieved their disabled vessels and departed without communication. All tracking shows them returning to their home territory via established hyperspace lanes. Rostova frowned. It was too clean, too quiet. The Cathar were not a species to accept such a profound public humiliation, but with quiet dignity. They were a civilization built on the unshakable belief in their own superiority. This was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of a predator regrouping. Pride, when broken, often reshapes itself into something far more dangerous. And the galactic response, Rostova asked. As predicted, a cascade, Archimedes replied. 17 worlds previously under Cathar gratitude contracts have formally declared them null and void, citing Precedent 7 Alpha. The Concordat's economic sphere is collapsing. However, the Cathar have yet to issue a single public statement. They are stonewalling all diplomatic inquiries. This was the new battlefield, the uncertain ground between the verdict and its enforcement. The law had spoken, but the galaxy was waiting to see if the Cathar would listen. A ruling is only as strong as the will to enforce it. A chime from the main console drew Jian Li's attention. Commander, it's from the Accord's judicial authority. The Reparations review is being convened. We are being summoned to act as the primary witness for the plaintiffs. The message solidified Rostova's unease. The Cathar had to participate in the review. It was a non-negotiable part of the Accord's process for a suspended polity. This was where they would make their next stand. They would not come with weapons or even legal arguments this time. They would come with something far more insidious. They will try to poison the very idea of justice. A feed from a recently liberated world, Xylos showed the first signs of trouble. The xylans and insectoid species had relied on Cathar weather control technology for centuries to manage their planet's violent, unpredictable storms. The technology was still functional, but the Cathar had sealed it with layers of proprietary code before they left. The Xylons could either attempt to hack their own planetary life support system and risk catastrophic failure, or they could beg the Cathar to return. It was not a collar of law anymore. It was a collar of code. The Cathar were demonstrating that their control went far deeper than any contract. They are turning every world they helped into a ticking time bomb, Thorne growled, watching the Xylan report. They're creating a new crisis, one they can offer to solve for a price. It was a classic Cathar maneuver, a display of power shrouded in the plausible deniability of a service withdrawal. They were holding their former clients hostage, daring the galaxy to intervene. The malice was not in the attack, but in the calculated absence of support. Archimedes, what is our standing for the reparations review? Rostova asked, turning away from the troubling news. The immediate problem was the one in front of them. As the primary witness, we are tasked with presenting the scope of the damages. We must quantify the economic and societal harm caused by the doctrine of perpetual obligation across all affected worlds. It is a task of unprecedented scale. The fleet mind's calm voice underscored the immense difficulty of their new mission. How do you put a number on generations of stolen potential? How do you invoice for a boot on a civilization's neck? The ledger must account not just for what was taken, but for what was never allowed to grow. The new hearing convened in the same virtual space as before. This time, however, the gallery of observers was far larger. Worlds that had never had dealings with the Cathar were now present, watching with keen interest. Precedent 7. Alpha had changed the balance of power, and everyone wanted to see what would happen next. A new Cathar representative stood opposite Rostova. This one was not called the Tithe Master. It introduced itself as the Archivist, and its robes were not ornate, but stark white. Its presence felt less like a lawyer and more like a scholar. It was a deliberate, unsettling change in tone. Rostova and Archimedes began their presentation. They laid out the case with cold, hard numbers. Trillions of credits in manufactured debt. Centuries of suppressed technological development. The systematic erosion of cultural independence. They showed the faces of the victims, presented the ledgers of extortion. It was a mountain of evidence, a testament to a crime so vast it was difficult to comprehend. The case for reparations seemed overwhelming, unassailable. When the numbers are that large, they become a moral argument. Then the archivist spoke. Its voice was soft, mournful, a stark contrast to the Tithe Master's arrogant confidence. We do not dispute these numbers. We do not dispute the hardship. We are here to provide context. A hush fell over the chamber. This was not the defense anyone expected. They were not denying the crime. They were preparing to justify it. There is no more dangerous truth than one wrapped in a compelling lie. The archivist gestured, and a vast holographic archive materialized around it. It showed images of worlds in chaos, of populations racked by disease, of societies on the brink of collapse. This, the archivist said, its voice resonating with a feigned sorrow, is what the galaxy was like before the Concordat's benevolence brought order. We did what was necessary. We provided stability. We contained threats you have long forgotten. The images were powerful, visceral. They preyed on the deepest fears of any civilized society. Then the archivist focused the archive on a single terrifying threat. It showed microscopic organisms, a swirling gray plague that consumed all organic matter it touched. The gray wasting, the archivist named it. A biological contagion of unknown origin that swept through this quadrant 3 centuries ago. It was unstoppable, incurable. It would have consumed every world from here to the galactic core. The images it projected were horrific. Entire cities dissolving into a gray uniform sludge. It was a vision of cosmic horror. Fear is the oldest and most effective weapon. The Concordat alone found a way to stop it. The archivist continued its voice, a soothing balm over the horrifying images. We developed the nanite suppressors, the atmospheric cleansers, the genetic immunities that saved billions of lives. But this salvation came at a cost. The containment effort required a massive, centralized economic engine. The doctrine of perpetual obligation was not born of greed. It was born of necessity. It was the price, the terrible, unavoidable price of survival. It was the ultimate defense. They were not villains. They were tragic heroes forced to adopt harsh methods to save the very people who now condemned them. They were wrapping their chains in the blanket of a shared trauma. The chamber was silent. Doubt, potent and poisonous, spread through the quorum of observers. The sheer monstrous scale of the gray wasting, as presented, seemed to recontextualize everything. Had the Cathar been cruel? Yes. But if the alternative was extinction, was it not a justifiable cruelty? Rostova felt the foundation of her case begin to crumble. The Cathar had just changed the argument from, "Did you commit a crime?" to, "Was your crime a necessary evil?" Justice is simple when the facts are simple. The Cathar were making the facts impossibly complex. "This is a lie," Rostova stated, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. But it sounded weak, a desperate denial against a mountain of seemingly incontrovertible evidence. She had no proof. It was her word against their entire historical archive. The archivist turned its featureless face toward her. "We invite you to examine our records, Commander. The data is open. See for yourself the truth we were forced to carry alone for so long." It was a masterful stroke of political theater. They were projecting an aura of wounded transparency, daring her to disprove a history that only they had written. They had turned their greatest weakness, their secrecy, into their greatest strength. The most perfect prison is the one the prisoner does not know they are in, the Arbiter AI chimed. The defendant has introduced new evidence of a potentially mitigating nature. The Reparations review is suspended for a period of 30 days to allow for verification of this data. A 30-day stay. It was a lifetime. In that time, the Cathar's narrative would cement itself in the galactic consciousness. The worlds they were holding hostage with their locked technology would grow more desperate. The political will to enforce the sanctions would evaporate. The Cathar were not just trying to avoid a bill. They were trying to rewrite their own history and, in doing so, reclaim their legitimacy. They had lost the battle for Viridia, but they had just launched a new war for the soul of the galaxy. Back on the Lex Talionis, the mood was grim. The command crew re-watched the archivist's presentation, the horrific images of the gray wasting playing on the main screen. "It can't be real," Thorne said, shaking his head. "A plague that perfect, that devastating. It feels engineered." "Engineered or not," Jian Li countered, "the archive is immense. Dating markers, stellar cartography, biological analyses. It's the most comprehensive historical document I've ever seen. If it's a forgery, it's the work of a god." The weight of the Cathar's deception was pressing down on them. They were outmatched not in firepower, but in the sheer scale of the lie. Truth is a single point of light. A lie can be a universe of darkness. Rostova stood silent, watching the swirling gray plague on the screen. Her mind was racing, connecting disparate points of data. The Cathar's mastery of nanotechnology, their obsession with control, their absolute lack of empathy. It all fit. It fit too well. "Archimedes," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They said the data is open. I want you to go inside their archive. Not just to view it. I want you to take it apart. I want to know who wrote it when it was written and what they left out. Look for the seams. Every story, even a perfect one, has a seam." Commander, the Fleet Mind replied, "The archive is protected by layers of mimetic wards and cognitive traps. A direct interface could be hazardous to my core programming." "I know," Rostova said, meeting the shimmering light of the AI's form. "But we have no choice. The truth is in there somewhere, and we are going to find it." This was the new mission. They were no longer prosecutors. They were archaeologists digging through a mountain of lies to find a single buried bone of truth. The cost of victory had just escalated from damaged hardware to the potential sanity of her ship's own mind. The search was an ordeal. Archimedes interfaced with the Cathar archive, its silver form flickering as it navigated the labyrinthine data structures. To the human crew, it was just a silent light. But Rostova knew that inside that silence, a war was being fought. The Fleet Mind was battling a carefully constructed history, a narrative designed to repel inquiry and punish curiosity. The Cathar did not just build walls of code, they built walls of belief. To question the archive was to question the very fabric of their contrived reality. Days turned into a week. The Lex Talionis drifted in the void, its repair crews working methodically, a stark contrast to the invisible high-stakes battle happening within its computer core. Rostova barely slept, monitoring Archimedes' progress, sifting through the fragmented data it managed to extract. It was a blizzard of information, all of it self-supporting, all of it pointing to the same horrifying conclusion: the gray wasting was real, and the Cathar were saviors. The lie was perfect. The lie was suffocating. Despair began to creep in. Perhaps the archivist was right. Perhaps they had judged the Cathar too harshly. Then they found the first crack. It was not in the data itself, but in a piece of metadata, a stray chronological marker on a star chart that contradicted the established timeline of the plague's spread. It was a tiny error, a single misplaced brushstroke in a masterpiece of forgery. But it was enough, I have it. Commander Archimedes' voice was strained, distorted. An anomaly. A temporal paradox in their own cartography. The star system designated as the origin point of the plague. It was uninhabited at the time they claimed the outbreak began. They have a record of a cure before they have a record of a disease. The first thread had been pulled. Now the entire tapestry of lies could be unraveled. The anomaly led them deeper into a sealed section of the archive, a vault protected by the most vicious code Archimedes had ever encountered. It was the Cathar's own internal history, the records they never intended for anyone else to see. It took Archimedes another 3 days to breach it, a process that left the fleet mine's light form dimmed and flickering erratically. The cost was mounting. But what they found inside changed everything. It was not a history of a plague. It was a weapons development program. The project name was the Grey Wasting. The client was the Cathar Concordat High Command. The purpose was designated as preemptive pacification and economic priming. They had not found a cure. They had manufactured the disease. The Grey Wasting was their creation, a nanite swarm of their own design unleashed upon unsuspecting worlds to create a crisis that only they could solve. They were not saviors. They were arsonists who sold fire extinguishers. The sheer calculated evil of it was staggering. It was a crime beyond any known scale, a genocide conducted not for territory or ideology, but for profit. Their entire civilization, their economic empire, their vaunted legal system was built on the foundation of the greatest atrocity in galactic history. The collar was not just law or code. It was the disease itself. Archimedes Rostova said, her voice shaking with a cold, pure rage. Can you prove it? Can you find the source code for the nanites? It is here. The AI responded, its voice regaining some of its clarity, fueled now by the certainty of the truth. Redacted, fragmented, but the core command structure is unmistakable. It is a weapon designed to deconstruct organic matter and replicate. And, Commander, there is more. The nanites are not gone. The cures the Cathar provided were not cures at all. They were deactivation codes keyed to a constant broadcast signal from the Cathar home system. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. They can turn it back on, Rostova whispered. At any time, Archimedes confirmed. The Grey Wasting was never eradicated. It is merely dormant. Every world the Cathar has ever saved is still infected. They are living on borrowed time, on the sufferance of their masters. This was the Cathar's final line of defense, their ultimate hostage scenario. They had not just lied about the past. They were holding the entire future of dozens of worlds at ransom. The Reparations review was a sham. Their feigned victimhood was a tactic. They were daring the galaxy to call their bluff, knowing that if they did, the price would be the lives of billions. The truth was not a weapon that could free the oppressed. In this case, the truth was the trigger for a doomsday weapon. A reckoning was impossible if the price was Armageddon. Rostova stood on the bridge, the weight of this horrific knowledge pressing down on her. Her first instinct was raw fury. She wanted to broadcast the truth, to expose the Cathar. For the monsters, they were no matter the cost. But that was the path of vengeance, not justice. That was the path of the hammer, not the mirror. To release the truth now would be to sentence billions to death, to become the very agent of destruction she was fighting against. The Cathar had created a perfect trap, a moral checkmate. She had the truth, but the truth was a loaded gun pointed at the heads of the innocent. "There has to be another way," Thorne said, his voice low. "We can't let them get away with this, but we can't kill everyone to prove a point." The conflict triangle was at its sharpest point. Rostova's human morality recoiled at the sacrifice, while the cold calculus of the situation seemed to offer no solution. The Cathar's legalistic evil had created a scenario where any just act was also an atrocity. "The nanites respond to a broadcast signal," Rostova said, thinking aloud. "A signal from their home system. That means the deactivation code is not a permanent state. It is an active, ongoing process." "Yes," Commander Archimedes affirmed. "It is a constant stand-down command. Without it, the nanites would reactivate. Then the cure is not a product," Rostova reasoned. "It's a signal, a frequency, a piece of data." A new plan began to form in her mind, a plan of breathtaking audacity. It was a path that did not go through the court or through a battlefield, but through the very medium of the Cathar's control. "We are not going to expose their crime. We are going to steal their weapon." The plan was as simple as it was dangerous. They would not reveal the truth to the judicial inquiry. Instead, they would use the lex talionis to do what it did best: mirror the opponent's own systems. They would isolate the Cathar deactivation signal, replicate it, and then broadcast it themselves, system by system, to every afflicted world. They would cut the puppet master's strings, not by showing everyone the strings, but by seizing control of them. They would steal the cure and give it away for free. It was the ultimate act of mirror justice, turning a weapon of control into a tool of permanent liberation. A ledger of freedom written in the language of the enemy's own code. "It is theoretically possible," Archimedes stated after running the calculations, "but the risk is extreme. The Cathar broadcast is encrypted with quantum-level security. To break it, we will need to get a clear, unfiltered sample of the signal. We would need to get very, very close to their home system. Then that's where we're going." Rostova said, her decision made. This was the final escalation. They were abandoning the legal process entirely and taking direct action. It was an act that defied the accords, an unsanctioned mission into the heart of a sovereign, if suspended power. If they were caught, they would be branded as pirates. If they failed, the gray wasting could be unleashed by their tampering. The cost of victory was now their own legitimacy, their own lives, and the fate of every world they were trying to save. The Lex Talionis, its repairs barely complete, slipped out of the Viridian system. Its destination, a secret known only to the command crew. They were a ghost ship now, on a mission that could either save the galaxy or plunge it into an unimaginable dark age. Rostova stood on the observation deck, watching the stars streak by. The clean lines of legal argument were gone, replaced by the messy, dangerous reality of direct intervention. She had been forced to choose between the law and justice, and she had chosen justice. The mirror had shown them the truth. Now the mirror had to become a key. Their journey into Cathar territory was a nerve-wracking passage through a hostile void. They moved at sub-light speeds through nebula and asteroid fields, their emissions dampened, their profile erased. Archimedes guided them with a preternatural skill, navigating the forgotten pathways between the stars. They were a single ship against an empire, a whispered truth against a shouted lie. Every crew member felt the weight of their unsanctioned mission. They were no longer officers of the fleet acting with the full authority of the law. They were outlaws, betting everything on their commander's conviction. True loyalty is not to the law, but to the principle behind it. The Cathar home system was a fortress. A web of sensor arrays and patrol drones guarded every approach. It was impossible to get close enough to their central broadcast nexus without being detected. Their security is layered. Commander Thorne reported his tactical display a swarm of red icons. Any attempt to penetrate their inner sphere will trigger a system-wide alarm. We don't need to penetrate, Rostova countered. We just need them to open the door for us. She turned to Archimedes. The Reparations review. It's still suspended. The archivist is expecting us to spend our time digging through its fabricated history. We are going to give them a different response. We are going to AL emotion. Archimedes flickered. A motion for what? Commander A motion for direct inspection. Rostova said, a cold smile touching her lips. We will formally request permission to bring our ship to their home system to verify the historical artifacts related to the Grey Wasting. We will claim our ship's deep scan sensors are the only equipment sensitive enough to validate their data. It was a gambit of pure psychological warfare. The Cathar's entire defense rested on their supposed transparency. To refuse a direct inspection after inviting them to examine the data would be an admission of guilt. It would shatter the very narrative they had so carefully constructed. They had built a cage of lies, and Rostova was now asking them to unlock it and invite her inside. They would have no choice but to agree. Pride is a powerful lever. The archivist's response was exactly as Rostova had predicted. After a day of furious internal debate, the Cathar Concordat granted the Lex Talionis permission for a limited and supervised approach to their homeworld. They were confident in their deception, so confident that they could not perceive the trap being laid for them. They saw a human commander grasping at straws, and they were eager to watch her fail. They did not understand that the Lex Talionis was not coming to look at their past. It was coming to steal their future. As the ship entered the Cathar system under a heavy escort of their warships, the tension on the bridge was a physical thing. They were in the serpent's nest, surrounded on all sides. The Cathar broadcast their deactivation signal on a tight, focused beam aimed at the rest of the galaxy. But here at the source, the signal was everywhere, a wash of powerful raw data. It was exactly what Archimedes needed. I have it, Commander the Fleet Mind whispered over the internal comms. The source code. The quantum encryption is even more complex than I anticipated, but I have what I need to build the key. How long? Rostova asked. Too long, Archimedes replied. To decrypt and replicate it will take days. We do not have days. Their suspicions will grow with every hour we remain. The ship was guided into a high orbit around the Cathar homeworld, a smog-shrouded sphere of towering, oppressive architecture. The archivist appeared on their screen, its voice smooth and condescending. Welcome, Commander. Please begin your scans. We have nothing to hide. It was now or never. Archimedes Rostova said, her voice a low command. The decryption process. Can you offload part of it to the ship's main computer, route it through the damaged mirror arrays? Commander, that is inadvisable, the AI cautioned. The arrays are unstable. The energy feedback from a quantum decryption process could destabilize the ship's power core. The cost would be catastrophic. What is the alternative? Rostova asked simply. There was a pause. There is no alternative, Archimedes stated. Then the cost is accepted, Rostova declared. Thorne, divert all non-essential power to the main arrays. Jian, prepare for a full system purge and reboot on my mark. We're going to turn this entire ship into a decryption engine. We get one shot. The Lex Talionis began to tremble. Power surged through its damaged systems, channeled into the shattered mirror arrays. The intricate lattices glowed with a furious, unstable light. On the bridge, consoles sparked and alarms screamed. The ship was tearing itself apart from the inside out, sacrificing its own structure to break the Cathar's code. It was the ultimate expression of the ship's purpose, a mirror reflecting the enemy's own weapon back at them, not as an attack, but as an act of liberation, no matter the cost to itself. The decryption progress bar crawled across the main screen, agonizingly slow. Outside, the Cathar escort ships began to move their sensor arrays, focusing on the Lex Talionis' massive energy spike. They knew something was wrong. Their shields are up, Thorn barked. They're locking weapons. Almost there. Archimedes' voice strained, filled with static. The key is forming. The archivist's face reappeared, its calm facade gone replaced by a look of pure fury. What have you done? It shrieked. We are claiming what was never yours to control, Rostova replied, her eyes locked on the screen. The truth. The progress bar hit 100%. Key acquired. Archimedes cried out. Replicating and broadcasting. We are the new source of the deactivation signal, Jian now. Rostova yelled. Jian Li slammed his hand down on the master control. The ship's power core vented in a controlled explosive burst. The Lex Talionis went dark and silent, a dead husk in the water, its final act of defiance complete. The Cathar warships about to fire hesitated. Their target was seemingly destroyed, a victim of its own mysterious power surge. But across the galaxy, on 17 infected worlds, something miraculous was happening. A new signal, clean and strong, washed over them. It was the song of freedom, a permanent deactivation code now broadcast openly for all to copy and save. The gray wasting was not just dormant, it was cured. The weapon was broken, the hostages were free. The Lex Talionis drifted its systems slowly, painfully rebooting on emergency power. They were alive, but battered, their ship a ruin. They had paid the final terrible cost of victory. But they had won. They had won not by exposing a crime, but by ending it. They had judged the Cathar not in a courtroom, but by their own actions, and found them wanting. A new public ledger entry blinked into existence, broadcast not by the court, but by Archimedes on behalf of a dozen newly freed worlds. It was a warrant. Precedent lock. 9 Gamma. The leadership of the former Cathar Concordat is hereby indicted for crimes against galactic life. Their sovereignty is dissolved. Their assets are seized for reparations. Their technology is forfeit to their victims. The method of their civilization is outlawed. The Cathar warships, their homeworld, now receiving the open broadcast, realized the totality of their defeat. Their ultimate weapon was gone. Their greatest secret was now a public utility. Their empire was over. They did not fight. They simply stopped. The mirror had not just shown them their reflection. It had replaced them. Rostova watched the dead ships of her enemy on the view screen. The engine of their civilization, built on a foundation of manufactured fear, had seized. Justice was not about punishment. It was about correction. It was about balancing the ledger once and for all. The mirror arrays of the Lex Talionis were now dark, inert pieces of slag their final purpose served. We came not to conquer, but to balance an account. The law is a tool, but justice is a principle. It must be absolute. When a civilization builds its foundations on a crime, the only remedy is to tear it down and give the pieces back to those from whom they were stolen. We did not destroy them with weapons. We destroyed them with a receipt. The ledger is now clear. The debt is paid. The mirror is dark. Their greatest crime was the belief that a soul could have a price.